In the movie The Dark Knight, Bruce Wayne had this saying that he used and make a bumper sticker that said, I believe in Harvey Dent, right? Remember all that? Well, I'm going to get my own bumper sticker made that says, I believe in Arthur Smith. And I've talked before about, it's crazy to think that a franchise that, even though the Falcons are not one of the original franchises in the league, they're not Green Bay and Chicago and these teams, right? But the fact is that nobody has ever won more than 66 games as a head coach for the Falcons, and that's Mike Smith. And I've said before, I still think Mike Smith is the best coach that the Falcons have ever had, mostly because of how he pulled this franchise out of the doldrums. The '07 season is still arguably in my 30 years here the worst professional season I've ever seen from a team. That '07 season with Mike getting arrested, going to federal prison, Bobby Petrino, Arthur Blank, all the craziness that surrounded it, that season was awful. And they go out and they change general managers. They they didn't demote, they promoted Rich McKay, but bring in Thomas Dimitrov and bring in Mike Smith. And the culture and the winning changed. And the team became, in its golden era, the best run of Falcons football we'd ever seen, right? And obviously, Matt Ryan and Julio and all those guys had so much to do with it. But the trigger man was Mike Smith and all of that. I think we're about to see that take off again with Arthur Smith. And I was looking, when you start to get your roster right in the NFL, where you've at least got a competitive roster, right? Where you're not the dregs of the universe, right? Where you're the least talented roster and things like that. If you get your roster at any sort of mediocre level, right? You're going to mostly play in close games in the league. The NFL is not like Georgia lining up against whatever, Arkansas Technical A&T, right? It's going to be close games. It's going to be 8 points or less, one score games in the league, right? That's how the league is. The league is designed to not have so massive disparities of talent between two teams. So you have to figure out in the league that when the games are close and tight, how do you win those games, right? And that's the difference between, look, winning at home, difference between, winning and losing in tight games makes all the difference in the world for your franchise. The final 2 years under Dan Quinn, and full disclosure, okay, I was never a Dan Quinn guy. I never thought Dan was a very good coach. I thought all the same mistakes that Dan made in 2015, showed up later on. I don't think that it ever grew and we ever, and I talked about this for so many years. I never felt like we had an advantage on the sidelines. We might have had an advantage at quarterback or wide receiver or linebacker or this or that. And that's immensely important. But there are times in the NFL when you need to have an advantage on the sidelines. And I never felt that way with Dan. I always felt like no matter who it lined up against, we were always at a disadvantage. And when you go back and look at some of the third quarter stats, as far as how many points their defense gave up, lack of being able to score in the third quarter, this, that, and the other, it kind of bow itself out, right? Now, if you look at Dan's last 2 years with the Falcons, in one score games, 8 points or less, the Falcons were 5-12 in those games. And that's with Matt, Julio, Ridley, this, that, the other, your brother, your mother, cousin, all of that. 5-12. Arthur Smith in his first year and quarter of the way through the season is 9-4 in those one-score games. So Dan in his last 2 years was a 294 winning percentage. Arthur's a 692 winning percentage. And if you want to tell me that how are we going to change? How's the culture going to change? What's going to be different? This, that, and the other. More than just the roster. I believe now that we have an advantage on the sidelines. And if nothing else, a lot of it has to do with one is hiring the right guys to go along with it, right? Bringing in a Dean Pease to run your defense for however long Dean is here. If he's here 3 more days, 3 more years, 3 more weeks, but bringing on the right guys, number one. Number two, being committed to what your philosophy is, right? If you're going to be a power run team, be a power run team. If that's what your identity is, as my old friend Bo Bach would say, what's your playing personality? Well, I know what the playing personality is of this team. They want to be tough, physical, power run it. They want to be a strong, dominant running team. Now, ideally, they would love to have the quarterback too that can mix in and be able to, hit some big pass plays because with all due respect, you've spent a lot of draft capital on the idea of drafting pass catchers. You want to be able to use those guys more, but not everything is fixed with this team. But you see the philosophy and the fact that they're getting the results in things that matter most, right? We talked yesterday about the fact that the Falcons are not just a top 5 team in rushing yards, they're also a top 5 team in rushing attempts. And what did I say? Bill Parcells' thing, he always talked about after a game, the number one stat he looked at on the stat sheet is how many rushing attempts did we have? Didn't worry about the yards, didn't worry about the yards per carry, touchdowns, passing yards, whatever. First stat he always wanted to see, he said, was show me how many rushing attempts that we had in the game. And that would tell him a pretty good idea about how the game flowed. So Arthur being committed to his philosophy is paying its dividends already. Doesn't mean that the Falcons are going to go 14-3 this year. Doesn't mean that the Falcons are going to win the division. But when we talk about those culture changes, and as you're trying to build the roster and bring in the playing personality of what you want this franchise to be, you're seeing that come together with Arthur. And frankly, it's coming together in a pretty fair, fast amount of time. Now, I know everybody talks about the idea of, having lots of money next year, and that's great. Okay. But, while you may not measure this year on wins and losses, let me assure you, top flight free agents in the NFL are not going to a 2-win franchise. There are always teams that have money to spend that can always go out and sign top tier guys, always create enough cap space. How many times have the Saints created cap space just in the last 4 months? So all of the money is great, but that doesn't bring you in anybody if your franchise is bad. And I think if you look at where Arthur Smith is taking this team, the direction that he and Dean Pease are getting this, you're starting to see some results in things that are going to be important. Now, the next thing that they have to do is they have to figure out how to win at home. That's the next important. So we're getting the one score close games figured out. Right? Things get crunched down and tightened up. We feel like we have a shot. And what do we say on here? If you can control the line of scrimmage and run the football effectively in the NFL, you can be in every game. You may not win every game. At some point, your quarterback or this or that has to happen. But if you can control the line of scrimmage and you can run the football effectively, you'll be around every week to have a chance to win. Now you just have to tweak and fine tune a few things. So the close score games are going drastically in our favor compared to what they were in the last 2 years of Dan. Now the next step would be get our home field figured out. Because before Sunday, the Falcons had only won 6 games in Mercedes-Benz since 2019. Obviously, that's a dreadful mark, and that's certainly not where you want to be. So I expect that trend, because Arthur Smith has spoken about this specifically at his pressers, talking about we got to be good at home. We have to figure out a way to win at home. And winning in London doesn't count. It's about winning here. So you're looking at these little steps with Arthur that you're seeing the things start to come together. Do they have all the personnel that they want? Of course not. Are they maximizing some of their personnel? Absolutely. They're maximizing guys like Caleb McGarry or Taquan Graham or some of these guys that they have, that they're maximizing it. I don't think anybody would have thought that Caleb McGarry would be graded out as a top 20 tackle in the NFL this year, but guess what he is right now? He's 18th in the league as far as his PFF grade. That's a hell of an accomplishment for a guy that, let's face it, has been a massive disappointment as a first-round pick for this team, and a long line of those kinds of guys, the Vic Beasleys and the Tack McKinleys and guys like that. So I'm going to go out on the streets. I'm going to head to my, I don't even know what, like the FedEx store or Kinko's. Do they even have Kinko's anymore? I'm going to go out there and I'm going to get me a whole bunch of bumper stickers that say, I believe in Arthur Smith, printed up. I don't know where I get them. I'll find a place online here, but I'm like Bruce Wayne in The Dark Knight, when he said, I believe in Harvey Dent. Well, guess what? I believe in Arthur Smith, and you should too, because the direction of this team is in really good shape right now.